The next speaker is Yves Moreau from our Future Health Department. And, you know, the price of genome sequencing is going down. Soon it will cost something like 1,000 euros to understand how our DNA actually looks like. So very soon we can actually know who we are. The question is more like, do we really want to know who we actually are? Because it's all in there somehow, huh? Yves?
All right, yeah, I think it's a good question. And I think that's actually where I want to end this presentation. What do you want from this genomic revolution that's coming up right now? So let me start with a little question. Who is this famous actor? Louder. Colin Farrell. Okay, so what does Colin Farrell have to do with the $1,000 genome? Well, himself, not much. But his son, James, actually suffers from a rare genetic condition called Angelman syndrome. It's characterized by intellectual disability, poor motor skills, and it affects about 1 in 20,000 kids. It's caused by an anomaly on chromosome 15, a deletion of chromosome 15. Those rare genetic conditions are all rare by themselves, often like 1 in 10,000, 100,000 kids. But altogether, they still represent 3 to 5% of the population. So actually, among all of you, many of them know families of friends or acquaintances or colleagues who have a child with a major genetic handicap. So this is not a small problem, this is a big problem. And the game changer is this. Diagnosing a condition like Angelman syndrome, even in the case of James Farrell, took about 2 years. 2 years for which he didn't have the best possible care, even with having a dad with unlimited resources. It's actually very difficult to diagnose many of those conditions. And what is changing right now is that we have technology coming up very quickly to sequence everybody's genome. And we're not yet at the €1,000 genome, but we're very close. Might be for this year, probably. Now, if you look at what's happening at the cost of producing a genome, of sequencing a human genome, is going down very quickly. It costs about $3 billion to run the Human Genome Project. To run the analysis of the human genome with the technology that was available in 2000, at that time, it would have cost about $300 million. Now it costs about $3,000. So we're talking a factor 100,000 in just over a decade. And if you see what's happening is that production of data is doubling every 6 months. It's actually 3 times as fast as Moore's Law. So this is creating an incredible challenge, which means that all of you are really needed to tackle this challenge. I'll try to make a few points regarding how challenging this area is about to become in terms of ICT and why we need the best technology possible to solve that problem. What you can even see is that in the last year and a half or so, the price of sequencing a genome has not come down, and that's because people produce so much data that don't buy new machines anymore, so vendors don't have an incentive anymore to bring out new sequencers that are faster. Probably the next step in the next couple months will bring another improvement, but ICT is the major bottleneck. That's one of the questions that I want to address. The second one is, as a society, what do we want to do with this genome? How do we want to balance the care that we give to patients and the protection of privacy? That's a major issue with this emerging technology. So what is this technology good for? Well, to diagnose some of those rare genetic conditions, like here a kid with Williams syndrome. But also, like half of you will be one day confronted to, cancer. We want better, more personalized treatments of cancer, and for this, it is really essential that we have knowledge of your genome and the genome of a tumor or a malignancy that you may have. Even further in the future, we really have this hope that the genome revolution will contribute to a shift in medicine from treatment to prevention. If we know dangers in your genome that are looming and that can be addressed by adaptation of the lifestyle or early treatment of the disease, we can give you longer, more productive, healthier, and happier lives. Now, what's happening out there? Well, I call that the Genome Rush. Okay, so this is the sequencing machines, about just under $1 million a piece, and how they're located, their numbers all over the world. So basically, biology labs in clinics have been buying these machines on an incredible pace. Okay. And if you think about the fact that about just over 12 years ago, we sequenced the first human genome, by now we probably have, it's hard to estimate, sequenced about 50,000 to 100,000 genomes. The data production in such a massive scale that a center like the BGI, Beijing Genomic Institute, which has about over 100 sequencers, has 1 exabyte, so 1 billion gigabytes of storage solution, and a regular supercomputer of only 200,000 cores. Now, if you add to this the fact that we can expect data production to go, now from 100,000 genomes to, in 2015, maybe 1 million genomes, in 2020, maybe 20 million genomes, we just don't know how we're going to deal with this problem from an IT point of view. We just don't know. We have to move this data around. We have to do research on this data. Transferring the genome of about 10, 50 patients takes a couple days, even with an Aspera connection. How are we going to do this? And you guys will be part of the solution. Now, the other point that I want to make is that we have to find the right balance between doing the best research possible, delivering the best medical care possible, ensuring the integrity of the scientific peer review system, which is a big issue here, and at the same time trying to protect the privacy of this information. This information is highly personal, falls under the Privacy Directive of the EU. It's absolutely intimate. I'll show that an example in a second. And it may contain information that's dramatic about yourself. It may tell you, if you're a woman, that you have a BRCA1 mutation and you have 60% or 80% chance of getting breast cancer sometime in your life. So we have to be careful about this data. Now, at the same time, we need to exchange this data. We need to have access to this data. Here is an example, a real one, coming from a recent study that we've participated to. This is a kid who was seen in Leuven by one of my colleagues, a geneticist. By looking at the genome of the patient, about 1 million mutations present in the genome. If you look at the ones that are kind of specific and not present in the rest of the population, a couple tens of thousands. If you look at those that are only present in this child and not in his parents, you come down to about 7 mutations. So the geneticist thinks that among those 7 mutations, there must be one that causes this disease that this child has, intellectual disability. But the case cannot be resolved. So how is the case resolved? Well, this is another patient somewhere else in the world, in this case in the Netherlands, in Nijmegen, seen by another colleague who, by sequencing the genome and performing the same analysis, finds 6 mutations in this kid, okay? And the case is unresolved. How do they solve the problem? Beer. By talking to each other, they eventually figure out that these patients look alike in an amazing fashion. They're not related. They're not from the same family. What you're picking up is the special features in the face. And then they look at the list of mutations they have, and they have 1 mutation in common. 1 change in 1 gene at exactly the same place. Case closed. Now, if we are very soon to have sequenced 1 million, 10 million genomes, it's going to take a hell of a lot of beer to solve all these cases. What we need is federated data analysis, data exchange on a scale that's absolutely massive, okay? Absolutely massive. If we don't do that, if we don't have access to this information, if we go back there, we can't tell what's wrong with the patient. No amount of magic will solve the problem. We need the information. We need to have access to it. Now, as I said, this information is sensitive. How sensitive could it be? Here is an anonymous genome. We've sequenced a genome of a patient, and all we know is the genome sequence, and we know that this was a patient, and we don't know anything about clinical condition, simply that the patient was born in 1946 and currently lives in California. Now, this is a genome of someone quite famous. I'll show that in a moment. If you only have that information, what can you do with it? Well, I thought a couple weeks ago, not much. Well, I was wrong. The Y chromosome is actually, for male, a paternal chromosome. You get from a father, your father's father, almost unchanged. So actually, your Y chromosome is linked to your last name very strongly. So what did researchers do? They took this Y chromosome and they looked for special markers. Actually, hobby genealogists out there look at special pieces of the Y chromosome that they use to link people to family names. And actually, you have public databases that contain this information about which markers on the Y chromosomes are present and what family names is linked to that. So they did just that. They took the same marker, they went to this genealogy databases, they matched it to that, and they figured out that the last name of this person must be Venter. Now they just went to a public directory of information in the US, and they said, how many Venters are there in California who were born in 1946? There are only 2 of them. One of them is Craig Venter, who was sequencing the human genome in the initial effort with Celera. So from this anonymous genome, we were able to retrieve the last name and with a 50% chance the identity of the person. Maybe this person suffers from a grave mutation that we now have the information about, and we would know something really important. If he is investing in any companies at around 65, maybe we know something that we can even use on the stock market. Bit extreme, but really have to be careful about what we want to do with this information. Now, to balance this, the benefits of research and the protection of privacy, we have to solve that problem, and it's not a technical problem. It's a social problem. It's a decision in society of what we want to do with this information. And the only solution that I can think of is that of a social contract. We, as researchers, as physicians, we want to have access to this information in a privileged way. We want to have more access to this information than normal. And what we need to do is we need to get this access, and in return we need to provide some added value to society that is very significant. Better care, guarantee that we are going to handle this data transparently, and the best possible scientific process, in particular peer review. We need to have this data publicly available so it can be checked by other researchers so we get to do the best science possible. And also, while physicians have long been used to be subjected to deontological rules, researchers who work with this kind of information should also be subject to deontological rules. So I want to leave you with 2 messages. The first one is, for ICT, this is a major challenge. This is not your average thing, okay? This is on a scale that we have not seen before. This is just emerging, it's a huge opportunity, and there is a huge need there. And then every one of you, as a member of society, we need to have a debate. We need to talk openly about this problem. What do we want to do with this information? Do we want to know this information? And if you want to know this information, how are you willing to share it? Okay, and so that question I want to leave to you to think about it and discuss with other people. Thank you very much.